All right, let's dive into some really interesting stuff about, well, ourselves, the parts we don't always show.
The stuff we hide.
Exactly, the hidden parts, like a shadow self or something like that.
Yeah, it's fascinating, like all those traits and desires and impulses that don't really fit the image we like to present.
The image we put out there.
Right, and it's not always about bad stuff, you know?
Yeah.
It can be positive things, too.
Oh, interesting.
Things that weren't really encouraged or accepted when we were growing up.
Okay, I see what you mean.
So maybe someone's super independent, seems totally self-sufficient, but deep down...
They really crave connection.
Yeah, exactly. But that longing might get pushed down, hidden away, because somewhere along the line...
It wasn't safe.
Right, not safe to show.
And then they might end up sabotaging their own relationships without even realizing it.
That's like a self-fulfilling prophecy, almost.
You push away what you secretly want.
Yeah, and what's tricky is this shadow self isn't just passive. You know, it influences us,
It affects our choices.
our behaviors, in ways we don't even realize. Sneaky.
It really is. Think about those times you act completely against your own values or goals.
Oh, yeah.
That's often the shadow at play.
So how do we even start to uncover this shadow self?
Well, one powerful way is to look at the judgments we make about others.
Judgments.
Yeah, often the things that irritate us most in other people, the stuff we just can't stand.
It reflects something we've repressed in ourselves.
It can be a mirror, yeah.
But couldn't those judgments also come from, like, our values or experiences?
You're right, it's not always so direct.
Like, if someone lies to me, my judgment of them is probably more about my own honesty.
Yeah, but sometimes if a judgment is super strong, out of proportion,
It's hitting a nerve.
right, a nerve connected to our shadow.
So it's about noticing those patterns, being curious about why we react so strongly.
Exactly.
So if I always judge people for being flaky, maybe I struggle with that myself, even if I don't see it.
It's a possibility.
Our judgments are like a secret code to our shadow.
They can be, yeah. All right, so let's say I've started to identify some of these shadow elements. What's next? Do we try to get rid of them?
That's the interesting part. It's not about eliminating the shadow.
So we don't try to make it disappear.
No, it's about bringing it into the light, accepting these parts as, well, part of us,
Part of who we are.
and figuring out how to integrate them in a healthy way.
So we don't judge ourselves for having these shadow elements, but approach them with curiosity.
Curiosity, compassion, yeah.
And integration doesn't mean letting those impulses run wild, right?
Right. It's more about understanding where they come from.
Finding better ways to express the needs behind them.
Exactly. Like if someone's shadow holds a fear of vulnerability,
They might be afraid to open up.
yeah, integration might look like taking small risks, you know,
Sharing a little more with trusted friends
maybe with a therapist.
instead of staying closed off
It's about taking the energy that's stuck in the shadow.
and channeling it into something positive.
Exactly. When we do that, we become more whole, more authentic, more free, really.
That's pretty powerful.
It is.
Like those hidden parts we try so hard to hide.
They actually hold the key to growth.
If we can just figure out how to work with them.
That's it.
Okay, we've been focusing on the downsides of the shadow self, but are there any upsides? Can it be helpful in any way?
That's a really good question. And the answer is, surprisingly, yes.
So it's not all bad.
It can lead to self-sabotage, but it also holds a lot of potential energy, untapped potential.
Like the stuff we've pushed away might actually be strengths in disguise.
Exactly.
So someone who's judging others for being too assertive maybe actually has that strong leadership quality inside.
That's a great example.
They're just afraid to express it.
By acknowledging and integrating the shadow, we open ourselves up.
We access a wider range of emotions.
Talents, perspectives, all of it.
It's like turning a weakness into a strength.
Absolutely.
Instead of being controlled by our shadow, we learn to use it.
That's a great way to put it.
Okay, so we've talked about this shadow self, how it can hold us back and also help us grow. But what about finding meaning in life? How does that fit into this journey?
That's a big question, one that a lot of people have thought about for a long time. Some people believe that meaning is something we create, you know?
We make it ourselves.
Others believe it's something we discover.
It's already out there.
And then there's the question of whether we can find meaning, even when things are tough, when we're suffering.
That's a hard one.
It is.
And how do we even begin to search for meaning when it feels like we've lost it? Is there, like, a roadmap?
Well, there are some really interesting thinkers and writers who've explored this idea of searching for meaning, especially in difficult situations.
So they've offered some insights.
Yeah, some really profound insights.
So instead of looking for one definitive answer, We should be open to different perspectives.
See what resonates with us.
What feels right.
Exactly. What gives one person meaning might not be the same for someone else.
It's personal.
It really is. The key is to be curious, explore different ideas, and trust our own inner wisdom along the way.
This is making me rethink some of my own assumptions about meaning.
It's a journey.
It is. It's not about finding the right answer, but about exploring and seeing where it leads.
Exactly.
But before we go too far down that road, I think it's time to bring in a specific approach to this whole meaning thing. Something that's especially relevant when life gets tough, when we're facing hardship and suffering.
That's a great idea. Yeah, it's time for a different perspective, for sure.
All right.
Let's talk about this idea that meaning, it's not something we just find out there in the world.
It's not like waiting to be discovered.
Right. It's more like something we create through our choices, even when things are really rough.
Even when we're suffering.
Yeah. There's this really amazing text out there. It explores this idea in a powerful way.
So it's not about chasing happiness or just feeling good.
It goes deeper than that.
It's about finding a purpose, even when life's throwing punches.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that life has its ups and downs. It's not always fair, but we still have a choice.
We choose how to respond.
We choose our attitude, yeah. And we find a reason to keep going.
That's a strong idea, but it's hard to picture, finding meaning in really awful situations.
I get it.
Like, how could someone in a concentration camp, for example, find a reason to keep going
Right.
when there's so much suffering around them?
Well, that's where this text becomes so relevant. It was written by someone who lived through that, the horrors of a concentration camp.
Wow.
And he came out of it with this incredibly deep understanding of the human spirit.
The ability to find meaning even in the darkest places.
Exactly.
So what was his secret? How did he do it?
He saw that the people who survived, who found a reason to keep going, even a small one, they were the ones who held on.
They had something to hold on to.
Right. He didn't pretend the suffering wasn't real, but he said that even then, we still have a choice.
A choice in how we react.
Exactly. He talked about 3 ways to find meaning, even in suffering.
3 ways. Okay, I'm listening.
The first one is creative work. The second is, meaningful relationships.
And the third?
Finding purpose within the suffering itself.
Okay, let's unpack that. Creative work makes sense. Finding a way to express yourself even when things are bad.
But what about relationships? How can they bring meaning when everything else feels like it's falling apart?
Think about it this way. Even in those terrible circumstances, connecting with other people, helping each other, sharing those moments of humanity.
It reminds us we're not alone.
Exactly. It gives us a purpose, even when things are really hard.
So even when we feel powerless, we can still make a difference for someone else.
And that can be a powerful source of meaning, yeah?
Okay, I get that. But this last one, finding meaning within suffering itself, that's a tough one.
It is.
It doesn't mean we should go looking for suffering, right? Or pretend pain is a good thing.
No, not at all. It's about recognizing that even in those dark times, there might be something to learn.
A chance to grow.
Or a chance to connect with something bigger than ourselves. Can you give an example of what that might look like?
Imagine someone going through a serious health crisis.
That's definitely suffering.
It is. It's painful and challenging. But it can also change how you see things,
You appreciate life more.
You find strength you didn't know you had.
So it's not the suffering itself, but what we do with it.
How we choose to respond.
What we learn from it.
Exactly. And that brings us back to the idea that, meaning we don't just stumble upon it.
We create it.
Through our choices, our attitude, our actions.
Even when things are hard.
Especially when things are hard.
Okay, I'm seeing how all this connects now.
Yeah.
We've got the shadow self holding us back and pushing us forward. And then this idea of finding meaning in the midst of suffering, through being creative, through our relationships, and even through the suffering itself.
It's a powerful combination.
It is. It's a reminder that life isn't always easy, but we get to choose how we face those challenges.
We always have a choice.
But what about the other side of that? What happens when we live in a world where suffering is almost gone, where comfort and pleasure are the most important things? Is that really the key to happiness?
No, that's a fascinating question, and it leads us to another really interesting text that looks at what could go wrong when a world focuses too much on pleasure and comfort. It describes a society that seems perfect, like a utopia.
Sounds nice.
Right. Happiness is designed, suffering is basically eliminated, everyone's needs are met without any effort.
Sign me up. Who wouldn't want that?
It sounds amazing on the surface, but when you look closer, you see that this constant pleasure comes with a cost.
There's a catch.
There is. Things like individuality, creativity, real human connection, they're all
Yes,
sacrificed
everyone content.
to maintain stability and comfort.
So it's like choosing shallowness over depth, fleeting pleasure over real meaning.
That's a great way to put it.
It's a trade-off.
It is. In this world, people are basically trained from birth to accept their roles, to find happiness in these pre-programmed pleasures.
There's no room for self-discovery
No space for personal growth.
or the kind of meaning that comes from experiencing the full range of life, the good and the bad.
It's like living in a perfectly manicured garden, but never getting to see the wild beauty of a forest.
That's a great analogy. And what's really unsettling is the lack of real connection in this utopia.
The relationships are surface level.
Fleeting, no depth.
It's almost like by getting rid of suffering and discomfort, they've also gotten rid of the things that make us human.
Our empathy, our compassion.
The kind of deep connection that comes from going through things together, both the joys and the sorrows.
That's deep. It makes you wonder if we're doing the same thing, even without realizing it.
Chasing comfort and convenience.
Maybe we're moving towards that same kind of shallow existence.
It's a question worth asking.
It is, and it's something we'll keep exploring in the last part of our deep dive. But before we move on, I want to go back to this idea of purpose for a minute. We talked about finding meaning even when things are tough, but what about those times when we're not necessarily struggling, but just feel lost?
Lost, directionless.
Yeah, like we don't know what we're doing with our lives.
That's something a lot of people can relate to. Feeling lost without purpose, it can be really disorienting.
It can.
But it can also be a chance for something new, a chance to grow and change.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground, haven't we? This whole idea of the shadow self, the search for meaning when things are tough, and even what could happen if we focus too much on just feeling good.
Yeah, a lot to think about.
It is. But what about those of us who aren't necessarily dealing with, like, trauma or some big life crisis, but we just feel kind of lost?
A little directionless, yeah.
Like we're going through the motions, but don't really know what we're aiming for.
That's a really common feeling, actually.
It is.
Yeah, like you're a ship without a rudder, just getting tossed around by the waves.
That's a perfect way to describe it.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we, take control of the ship? Do we have to quit our jobs, travel the world, do something drastic to find our purpose?
Not necessarily. Sometimes it starts with a simple shift in perspective.
Yeah.
Instead of looking for some big external mission, what if we start by paying attention to the things that already light us up?
The things we enjoy.
Yeah, the things that make us curious, the things that make us feel truly alive.
Like when we're in the flow, totally engaged.
Exactly.
Whether it's a hobby, a conversation, even just being out in nature.
Those moments, they can give us clues about what really matters to us.
Like hidden messages.
In a way, yeah. And often purpose, it's not something we find all at once. It kind of unfolds gradually as we follow those little sparks of interest.
So it's more about exploring than having a big aha moment.
More about curiosity and being open to trying new things.
Not being afraid to step outside our comfort zone.
Exactly. Sometimes our purpose is right there in front of us, just waiting for us to bump into it while we're out exploring and having fun.
That reminds me of that saying, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step.
That's a good one.
We don't need to have all the answers figured out before we even start.
Just take that first step, even a small one.
And see where it leads.
It might lead you somewhere amazing. And remember, purpose isn't always about a specific job or career or achieving some big goal.
It can be about how we live our lives, right?
Exactly. The values we live by, the impact we have on others, on the world around us.
So it's not just what we do, but how we do it.
That's it. Bringing intention and meaning to our everyday actions.
Even the small thing.
Even the mundane stuff. Purpose can be found in how we connect with people, how we take care of ourselves, how we contribute to our communities.
It's about living with intention, even when life feels chaotic.
Exactly. We don't have to wait for some big moment to start living a purposeful life. We can choose to create that meaning right now.
That's pretty empowering.
It is. And as we continue to explore our shadows, as we face the challenges that come our way, as we make choices that align with our values.
Our purpose will keep unfolding.
Step by step, moment by moment.
It's a journey, not a destination.
That's a great way to put it.
Well, I think we've covered some really fascinating ideas today. All this stuff about the shadow self, searching for meaning, and living a life that feels both authentic and purposeful.
Yeah, it's been a great conversation.
I hope everyone listening has found some things to think about, some inspiration to take with them.
I hope so too.
As we wrap up our deep dive, I'm left with this question. If you could design the perfect society, one that supports everyone's well-being and helps people find fulfillment, what would be the most important things? How would you balance pleasure, meaning, and freedom? It's something to think about as we continue on our own journeys of self-discovery. Thanks for joining us, and until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep embracing every part of who you are.